Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, we'd like to begin now, so if we could just all please find a seat. Even better, a quiet seat. Good afternoon, and welcome to this press conference to present the preliminary statement of findings and conclusions from the International Election Observers for yesterday's early parliamentary elections here in Armenia. We will be doing the press conference today in translation into Armenian as well. Armenian and English will be the two languages, so if you do need a headset, they can be found near the entrance where you came in at the room in the back. We will have time for questions from journalists later today after the presentation of this statement. So before that, let me please introduce the presenters today. Presenting the statement will be Mr. Petr Asuski, the Special Coordinator and Leader of the OSCE Short-Term Observer Mission, followed by Mr. Alexander Potier, the head of the delegation from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and then Ms. Nahimi Langri, the head of the delegation from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, followed by Ms. Heidi Hautala, the head of the delegation from the European Parliament, and Ambassador Ursula Gacek, who's the head of the Election Observation Mission sent by the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. So with no further ado, I'll hand the floor to Mr. Asuski.
Thank you. Our main conclusions are that yesterday's elections were held with respect for fundamental freedoms and enjoyed broad public trust that needs to be preserved through further electoral reforms. Open political debate, including in the media, contributed to a vibrant campaign, although cases of inflammatory rhetoric online were of some concern. The general absence of electoral malfeasance, including of vote buying and pressure to voters, allowed for genuine competition. The integrity of campaign finance was undermined by a lack of regulation, accountability, and transparency. Despite the shortened time frame, the elections were well administered. Election day proceeded calmly and peacefully, with all stages assessed positively by almost all of our observers, indicating general adherence to the procedures. Many of the people we met with in recent days are weeks remarked on open atmosphere during the campaign that enabled real substantive debate. Indeed, members of our own team noted with regard to the leaders' debate held last week that they would like to see similar debates in their own countries. Contestants were able to conduct their campaigns freely, and key freedoms of association, assembly, expression, and movement were fully respected. We were repeatedly told about the political will expressed by authorities, electoral contestants, and voters themselves to discourage the selling and buying of votes, which has been a problem here in the past. This is a welcome change. But more change is needed. Our organizations have previously put forward a range of recommendations that we encourage to address. The winners in yesterday's election were clearly the people of Armenia, who brought good spirit and energy to this election. To sum up, democracy cannot proceed without trust, so I am pleased that broad public trust was the central characteristic of this election. Now that voters have delivered their message, it's up to the political leadership in Armenia to ensure that this momentum is maintained and further reforms implemented to fully consolidate the positive assessment we are making today. at least one deeply personal remark. I was here first time to observe the election in the year 1999, 19 years ago. Then I was here once again. Now it's my third observation. And the situation I saw before was expressed with simple sentence of the driver of the car that brought us from precinct to precinct. He told me years ago, it's equal who win. There is no hope for Armenia. Yesterday I was one of the people who saw that, thanks God, there is a hope for Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poche. And now, thank you, Mr. Osuski. And now, Mr. Poche.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all the Armenian citizens we met at the polling station yesterday for their warm welcome and very friendly cooperation through the whole day. The Assembly's delegation has been invited by the authorities of the country to observe the elections because Armenia is under the monitoring procedure in the Assembly. Our delegation represents most of the political groups of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The delegation was, as always, accompanied by the legal experts of the Council of Europe Venice Commission. I congratulate the Armenian people. The 2018 peaceful so-called Velvet Revolution is in conjunction with the political will of the current authorities enabled the holding of democratic election. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has observed every election in Armenia since 1995. And despite of the complex electoral system and reported instances of intimidation via social media, the recurring electoral irregularities which tainted many elections in the past were absent. It is up to Armenians' elected representatives to launch legal reforms to consolidate the democratic process in the country. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the Venice Commission hope to continue their close cooperation with Armenia, and our full report on the observation on the early parliamentary election will be presented by me in Strasbourg during the January part session in 2019. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you. Now, please, Ms. Langer.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that I fully agree with and also support the overall conclusions as just announced by Peter. On behalf of the OCE parliamentarians who has been participating on this mission, I would like to add two precisions, one about gender equality and one about campaign finance. First, let me mention gender equality. All candidate lists met 25% gender quota requirements, and women were even accounted for 32% of the total of candidates. When you look at these numbers, it seems to be a quite positive thing. But however, this quota does not ensure the same proportion of representation of women in parliament due to rules of seat distribution. So, and when driving through the city, we noticed also that women rarely were featuring in the campaign. However, we saw many of them, many women, hardworking, Yesterday, they were members of electoral commissions and they were ensuring that everything went smoothly. So it is upsetting also to hear that women only occasionally campaigned on their own or even separately. They had a campaign among women only, and that they rarely appeared as speakers in rallies. It is even more upsetting when we heard that some women candidates were a target of harsh rhetoric because of their gender. I suppose most of you know the song "It's a Man's World" from James Brown and Tom Jones. Well, we know that politics has historically been a man's world, but as women are more than half of the population, this should be reflected in politics as well. I hope, therefore, to see reforms that encourage more women in politics and make sure that the next election are fully representative for both men and women. And the revision of the electoral system is foreseen in the nearest future. We welcome also the proposal to increase the gender quota to 30%. This is a good step towards full gender equality and parity in Parliament, and let's hope also parity in government. The second point I would like to make is about the campaign finance. As a body of parliamentarians elected in our own countries, we personally feel the importance of democratic and transparent elections. Transparency is a cornerstone of healthy democratic society, and that is why I find the campaign finance regulation here in Armenia an issue that needs further improvement. Let me give a few examples. Contrary to previous recommendations, organizational expenses such as office space, transportation, and communication are not considered as electoral related and may therefore remain unreported. Moreover, when organizations like of citizens observers are contracted by political party, this should be reported also in campaign expenses. Some candidates confirmed to us that they were directly financed, that they were financing their own campaign, which bypasses official party campaign funds. This is in contravention to the law. We also notice that there is no transparency of expenses made before the start of the official campaign. So more clarity and guidance in terms of party finance in between the elections and especially in the pre-electoral period are necessary. Therefore, we hope and we would welcome efforts to improve legislation on party and campaign finance. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And now Ms. Hautala.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to be back in Armenia, as I was also the head of the European Parliament's Election Observation Mission delegation back in April 2017, and let me say what a difference 1.5 can make in the political atmosphere of the country and in the reality. So over the last few months, Armenia has been very high on the European Union's foreign policy agenda. Looking at our bilateral relations, we signed and we are provisionally implementing the comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement. This is now our roadmap for cooperation, and it includes strong reform support and financial assistance. These snap elections are therefore a major democratic milestone and a test for the further deepening of the EU-Armenia relations. That is why the European Parliament is very attentive to the developments in Armenia, and this is exactly why we are here today. As part of the International Election Observation Mission, the European Parliament fully endorses the preliminary findings and conclusions of the mission. I take this opportunity to thank my colleagues from other parliamentary assemblies and to commend the excellent work by Ursula and her team from the ODIHR during this mission. I would also like to thank the EU delegation in Yerevan for their support. So, 4 remarks in addition to what has already been said by my colleagues. Firstly, these were snap elections, and there was therefore limited time for parties to campaign, but also for the Central Electoral Commission to organize the process and for other bodies to scrutinize the implementation of the relevant law. So let me highlight the very good performance of the Central Electoral Commission in this difficult context. Secondly, in particular, we're very happy to observe a major drop in electoral malpractice. Such practices do not disappear completely overnight, but it is clear that the amendments to the criminal code, the educational campaigns, and the resolve of key leaders to fight these are having a positive impact, to say the least. Continued efforts are needed to make these electoral malpractices a cultural relic of the past, as well as to put an end to intolerant rhetoric. Many of our comments, thirdly, refer to the legislative framework. To be precise, to issues such as campaign financing, citizenship requirements, the management of voters' lists, and the strengthening of women's political participation. And I fully share the remarks made by Nahima Landry on the need to urgently empower women's political participation. And indeed, if women can so efficiently count votes in polling stations, they can also candidate and be elected and govern this country. So there are needs to be addressed through amendments to the current legislation, and we hope that such amendments will remain a priority for the Armenian government and the National Assembly, and that any reform is carried out in an inclusive way with the involvement of both opposition and civil society. Of course, the international community is ready to keep providing expert support. So, fourthly, and finally, let me now address civil society engagement in electoral process. The detailed work of such organizations can be commended, and it is refreshing to hear for the first time so many civil society representatives agreeing with representatives of both the authorities and with most political parties on the way the elections took place. But I must, however, regret that, according to reports, one party abused the access given to civic observers by recruiting and paying what I will call non-observing observers in order to obtain extra accreditation for their representatives. By conclusion, I want to underline that these elections were very well organized. There were minimal irregularities and they were free of pressure on voters. I'm very happy that as a result, public trust in the electoral process was high. So we congratulate the Armenian authorities and participants in these elections. We encourage the government and the National Assembly to further improve the legislation ahead of future elections. The EU, including the European Parliament, will continue to assist in this process. And this is in line with our commitments as part of the deepening EU-Armenia relations. This is for the benefit of all Armenian citizens. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And now, Ambassador Gacek.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure when 4 such bodies are able to speak with one voice on an election that they have had the pleasure of observing. So let me start by saying that I agree fully with the assessment made by my colleagues here, and I would also like to thank them for their cooperation. They have provided us with valuable support on election day, supplementing our own team of some 230 long-term and short-term observers. We're also very grateful to the authorities and other stakeholders for their warm welcome, their openness and assistance. The ODIHR Election Observation Mission started its work just a few days after the elections were called. In our observation, we have followed the whole electoral process, from candidate and voter registration media coverage, political finance, election day procedures, and beyond. We will be staying to follow up and see how any complaints or appeals are handled. It is my special pleasure today to reiterate a very important conclusion we reached about these elections. Today, as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I'm particularly pleased to say our assessment of these elections highlights that fundamental freedoms were respected. My colleagues have already commented on the many positive aspects that characterize these elections and on the trust and confidence of the voters invested in the authorities. With such trust, however, comes responsibility, the responsibility to ensure that these positives are safeguarded. We will prepare our final report in several weeks' time, and we will include recommendations on the remaining shortcomings that we have identified. Most of these have already been discussed by colleagues. We would also refer to the overall legal framework that needs improvement, with some of our previous recommendations still remaining valid. My colleague here explained the problems with campaign finance, and indeed we also see the need for major reform to ensure integrity, accountability, and transparency. The balanced approach of the media, including that of public television, should be preserved. We did not see any systematic vote buying or intimidation of voters in these elections, and very much hope that such practices have now been well and truly consigned to the past. As always, ODIHR stands ready to help Armenia address the remaining shortcomings so that genuine elections like these are not the exception but the norm. So if I can leave you with one final sentence, Armenia, seize the moment and make genuine elections the norm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now, as mentioned earlier, we do have time for questions from the media. What I'll ask you to do is please raise your hand and we'll have a microphone brought around to you. When you have the microphone, please, could you just, before asking your question, give us your name as well as the media outlet you represent.
Panorama IEOM հայկական լրատվական կայք իմ հարցը ուղղում եմ Հայդի Հաութալային Տիկին Հաութալա Եվրոպա
I'm sorry, just for a moment, we're scrambling for earpieces here. If you could just it's not in here. Okay, just a moment. Which channel should have been? Try channel 1. Channel 1, okay. Before it was in that. Okay.
Այսօր եվրոպական մեդիայից մեկը մեջ բերել էր ձեր թվիթը, այսպես ասած, որտեղ դուք գրառում եք արել եւ այս ընտրությունները, նշել, որ այս ընտրությունները համեմատած 2017 թվականի հետ կարծեք լինեն գիշեր եւ ցերեկ։ Իսկապես այդպես է եւ կարող եք նշել մի քանի կոնկրետ օրինակներ, որը ձեզ հանգեցրել է այդ եզրակացության։ Շնորհակալություն։
So there was a, okay.
Well, I did it last night, but because we didn't have the joint press conference by then, I took it out. But now I can confirm that I really can confirm what I did tweet, that indeed the difference in terms of intimidation of voters, vote buying, would really not have been observed in these elections, and that was not the case in 2017. So in this sense, I'm happy to say that that is really my assessment after having heard all the other observations.
Այսօր եմ Հասմիկ Համբարձումյան Ես ուզում եմ իմանալ, եթե դուք նման պնդում եք անում, ինչու նախորդ տարի այդպիսի հայտարարություն չարվեց, Տիկին Ահաութալային եմ ասում, եւ կար ինչ-որ որոշակի կաշկանդվածություն, որ նախորդ տարի այդպիսի հայտարարություն չի արվել դիտորդների կողմից, եւ երկրորդ հարցը, եթե հնարավոր է, խորհրդան չանցած ընդդիմությունը հայտարարում է, որ նախընտրական շրջանում եղել են սպառնալիքներ, հնչել են կոշտ հայտարարություններ, դուք դիտարկել եք դրանք կա այդպիսի դիտարկում արվել է դիտորդների կողմից։
Well, to the first part of your question, please. This is not at all true. If you read the statement and the assessment of the ODIHR, together all the parliamentary assemblies under the auspices of ODIHR, we did say that there was pressure on voters and there was buying of votes. So that is not at all the case that we were prevented from saying that, because that's what we also observed.
If I may, regarding the campaign period, because we were the only of all the observers here, we were watching from the very beginning. Every instance where political parties, stakeholders in the election process came to us, or during our discussions with them, where they raised the issues of intolerant language, threats, we always asked for evidence and we always followed up all of these instances. And we found that there were cases of intolerant language. However, in terms of actual threats, we were not able to substantiate those with hard evidence. Of course, the rhetoric sometimes was not as civilized as one would like, but generally it remained within the bounds of a vibrant and lively campaign. So we did not see something that would be of exceptional noteworthiness. And you will see a fuller assessment of the media environment and of the campaign when you have time to read a little more carefully the full preliminary statement, which we are just going to be providing you immediately after this meeting. Of course, within the confines of this press conference, we can pick up on certain key themes and are happy, of course, to expand on anything that you would like us to do so.
Ազատություն ռայզոկան, Անուշ Մկրտչյան, ձեր միջանկյալ զեկույցում, որը դուք արել էիք նախքան քարոզարշավի մեկնարկը, դուք նկատել էիք, որ ատելության քարոզ կա հատկապես մեդիա, ավելի ճիշտ սոցիալական ցանցերում, եւ նաեւ նկատել էիք, որ հանրային հեռուստատեսությունը շարունակում է ինչպես նախկինում, հիմա էլ ավելի կառավարամետ լինել։ Արդյոք այս քարոզարշավի ընթացքում դուք ձեր մոտեցումը փոխեցիք։
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Please be aware of that the interim report was compiled and published before the campaign period actually started properly. And even yesterday, we gave a more positive assessment on the overall campaign environment and the balance of the coverage in the media than we had even had 4 or 5 days earlier. What we found as the campaign started properly, then generally the media, both private and public, were playing by the rules, abiding by this principle of giving fair access to all the parties. And as the campaign progressed, the balance of the coverage actually improved as the campaign went on. So while in the interim we were flagging up potential areas where we might have anticipated problems, as the campaign went forward, the situation improved, we're happy to say.
Նարինե Էդիցյան, Պարա TV. Իմ հարցը վերաբերում է բոլոր դիտորդներին, ով կցանկանա պատասխանել հարցին։ Հարցս հետևյալն է, ըստ արդեն ստացված արդյունքների, ստացվում է այնպես, որ խորհրդարանում ներկայացված չի լինելու ընդդիմություն։ Արդյոք դա մտահոգում է ձեզ եւ նաեւ այս ընտրությունները տեղի ունեցան մի ընտրական օրենսգրքով, որը իշխող կուսակցության կողմից բազմիցս քննադատության է արժանացել, սակայն այդ ընտրական օրենսգրքով եղավ ընտրությունները, ինչպես նաեւ մեկ այլ հարակից հարց, եթե կարելի է, կենտրոնական ընտրական հանձնաժողովը արձանագրեց 48% մասնակցություն, որը բավականին ցածր ցուցանիշ է նախորդ տարիների համեմատ։ Ինչպես կգնահատեք նաեւ սա։ Շնորհակալ եմ։
I could perhaps start with the question or answer about the fact that if there is no opposition. Of course, it's not the rule of observers to evaluate how the parliament will be consistent. That means it was the will of people, and we are not judging the will of people. So the parliament is elected in accordance to rules, and I think it's the best possible result. If there is opposition or not, we will see it in the next 4 years. And concerning the election attendance of citizens, of course, it's, I would say, the freedom of citizens to take part in election or not to take part. And I think it's always the same also in my country, in Slovakia. The people who stay at home and don't go vote will receive that what the other will choose. And they have to live 1,461 days with it, because that's our 4 years in total. And perhaps in the next election, they will start and go to vote if they are not satisfied. But as I said, it's not our role to evaluate the result.
I would like to add something. Of course, winning election with such a big majority is putting the whole responsibility on the new majority. And of course, this is only first step. If the reforms, and mainly of judicial system, of your courts, the people who are making verdicts in those courts, if all these and the other reforms will not follow, then of course this is going to be a problem. But as Peter just said, we cannot judge the choice. We have to acknowledge, and the only thing what we can discuss here is whether, for example, from my side, whether yesterday, when I was running 7 cities and many poll stations to observe, the only way I can understand what is going on, that was by speaking with people. And it was almost always an expression of the hope and of the free choice.
Hello, my name is Rayhan Dimitri. I'm with BBC News. I just wanted to clarify what Heidi was saying. I just missed the question, which was in Armenian, about vote buying. Were you referring to the process before the campaign? If you can clarify that, please. And also, when we report on any elections, we always look for those 2 words, free and fair. Is this something that you can give us today and say that these elections were free and fair? Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you, the first part of your question, if you could just clarify, I don't think that was clear.
It was one of the questions from the Armenian media to which Heidi gave a response, and it was something to do with vote buying or some irregularities. I just missed the point because I didn't get the question. Was it the case? Was something observed? Just to clarify.
I hope I'm not just repeating myself, but we did observe vote buying quite remarkably, especially around the election day, around the polling stations. There was quite a buzz around the polling stations in April 2017, according to my very personal observations included. And this time, we didn't observe anything of that. So that justifies my comparison.
If there is this a question, of course the long-term observers observed also the pre-campaign situation. They observed and evaluated on daily basis the media, the printed media and TVs, different types. Of course there are some of them that are private and some of them that are owned by someone who is involved in election. But generally the attitude was fair, and no one can say that the main media somehow supported this or that. And free and fair, generally it's so that if some party has a bad result, then there are always some objection and this or that. But comparing, and this had been my 17th election in my life, I saw a great fraud in election. I saw a theater election that was a joke in fact, but it was a real election with counting, with everything, but it was a joke from the ground. But this, here, I saw nothing like that. It was fair and comparable, in my opinion, with election I saw in democracies that are outside of any dispute. I had the opportunity to observe the German election last autumn, and I would say the only difference between the German and Armenia was that here are proxies for the parties and representative of the parties, which is never the case in Germany, where there are no party-affiliated people in commissions. But the trust of the people in the election in Germany is 100%. And I am happy that even with the local tradition of proxies and representative of party, I think they are in this country a guarantee that no one can do anything because everybody is watching on everybody's hand. And it's good so. So this, in my opinion, and I stand behind it, had been a free and fair election.
All right, I think we have time for 2 more questions this afternoon. So, yes, please.
Անեիթ Հովհաննիսյան, Երկիր մեդիա հեռուստաընկերություն, հարցս դարձյալ ընդհանրական է, շատ խոսվեց այստեղ քաղաքական ուժերի ֆինանսավորման մասին, նախընտրական հիմնադրամներ, այսինքն ոչ հավասար են ֆինանսավորվել։ Ուզում եմ իմանալ, կառանձնացնեք արդյոք կոնկրետ մեխանիզմներ այդ հավասարությունը ապահովելու համար, ինչ մեխանիզմներ կան, ու նաև թափանցիկության մասին խոսվեց, ուզում եմ ավելի հստակեցնեք, թե ինչ է դա նշանակում, այսինքն արդյոք քաղաքական ուժերը ծախսերը կատարել են ոչ այդ հիմնադրամներից կամ կեղծ հայտարարագրեր են ներկայացրել։ Շնորհակալություն։
If I may answer that, we followed the campaign financing very closely, and we are very much aware that there are mechanisms in place in the Central Election Committee. There is an oversight body where reports come, the parties, the contestants are regularly reporting on their spending. However, maybe 2 points to point out. One is that many expenditures do not need to be reported. So much of the expenditure you can spend on staff costs, administrative costs, office costs, of course, transport, telecommunications, they don't need to be reported, which will naturally give an advantage to the parties with a strong infrastructure. If they have already a strong regional network of offices, they're going to be at an advantage. They already have this in place. They don't need to spend the money. They don't need to declare the money. The other aspect was that printed, for example, materials, posters, things like that, they should all be going, the money, all the contributions should go into one fund, and then all the payments should be made from that fund. So there is you can see what the flow is of the financing. And we found even some candidates admitted it to us themselves. Maybe because of administrative problems, maybe because of a lack of their knowledge, they were actually just ordering maybe publicity materials and paying from their own pocket. So that money wasn't being recorded. And we've addressed these issues in the past in our recommendations. So now when we go down and have time to really go over this and digest this again and come with the new materials we have from this election, we hope to make some very firm and concrete recommendations, which we hope that the Armenian authorities will also cooperate and see that there is a need to make the playing field as level as possible for all the contestants. So it has been an issue in the past, and of course the law hasn't changed in that respect, so we need to come back to those previous recommendations.
And I just wanted to add that not only this are some examples of what could be improved, but another problem or something we have seen that the law that you have here in Armenia about the cost of campaign is just covering a certain period, a period of campaigning, and it was a very short period. But we have seen, of course, if the period of campaigning is very short, of course, a lot of parties, and it's not unusual, they started their campaign before that. So the period was the period before the official date of the start of the campaign. There were already a lot of people, a lot of parliamentarians and parties who were campaigning. And this period, this pre-electional period, is not covered. Because and so there is no transparency. Also, these costs that were made in that period should be also declared, so that the Armenian people know what was spent on campaign. Now they are just seeing a part of it, namely the part that was in the official period of campaign, and not the weeks before that. And there was also a lot of campaign weeks and months before that.
There is one question which was not answered from the lady. The question was how we can trust in such election when the electoral system was not changed, and if that system was criticized by even by the party, winning party. And this is truth. I believe that such a short notice for such an important election is a very short notice. But this is the answer to your question. It was so quickly that even though, and I'm a part from my assembly, I'm a part of Venice Commission. I'm working with the Venice Commission. And we received the project of the law to look at it. But the period was so fast. It was so fast. It was such a short period that we could not even evaluate. And second, that would be also very difficult to introduce the new system in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time before election. That would be, that could be a mess. And I remind you that even though your system, the old system for election, is very complicated and is not the best one. But on many occasions, this system was analyzed also by the Venice Commission, that we have a big trust because they are not politicians, they are just professors and they know what they are doing. And never the system that you used during this last election never was questioned. That's my answer to.
In fact, it doesn't mean that this previous electoral law shouldn't be changed. Of course, yes. Here we heard a few, I would say, remarks concerning the financing this or that. But generally, in a democracy, we have to adhere to the valid law. And this law, in accordance to which this election had been administered, is acceptable, and acceptable is also the result that was reached in accordance with this law.
Okay, I'm sorry, and then I think our last question today, we have the schedule this afternoon a bit heavy, but please.
Դուք ասացիք, որ զրուցել եք տարբեր քաղաքական գործիչների հետ, ովքեր ասել են, որ սպառնալիքներ եւ հետապնդումներ կան իրենց եւ իրենց քաղաքական ուժի նկատմամբ։ Երեք հանրապետական կուսակցության ցուցակի առաջատարներից մեկը Դավիթ Շանազարյանը հայտարարեց, որ սա Հայաստանի պատմության մեջ ամենախայտառակ ընտրություններն էին, որովհետև առաջին անգամ էր, որ թեկնածուին հրավիրում էին ազգային անվտանգության ծառայություն եւ այլն, եւ առհասարակ հանրապետականները վստահեցնում են, որ ունեն ապացույցներ, որոնք որ ըստ որի իրենց նկատմամբ կան ճնշումներ եւ սպառնալիքներ։ Ինձ հետաքրքրում է, դուք նրանցից պահանջել եք, ասացիք, ապացույցներ։ Չեն տվել նրանք որևէ փաստ, որևէ ապացույց, որ իրենց նկատմամբ կա այդ ճնշումը եւ հետապնդումը։ Շնորհակալություն։
These most recent events have literally happened just before the election day. Please remember that what we are discussing today is the preliminary statement. So we now have time. We are remaining here in the country. We're going to be following up and seeing whether there is substance to these reports. And then we will be able to make reference to them, if need be, in our final report. So please don't feel that what you have received today is the end of the story. This is still, we still don't have the official results. We haven't seen whether any complaints will be lodged by anybody. If they are lodged, how they will be dealt with. So I would ask for your patience. We like to do these reports well. Whilst everybody would like us to do them well and quickly, we never sacrifice well to speed. So any allegations that have just come to our attention, they will be, we will look at them and assess them fairly, impartially, independently, and if need be, they will be reflected in the final report that will come to you after, in about 6-8 weeks' time, I would estimate. So please be patient with us. We will do it as best we can.
But generally said, and now I am in a skin of the voter of any party, which candidate this or that has been attacked by state power. It, in my opinion, I don't know how you think about, would make me much more strong to support the injustice attack my candidate. So I'm sure that it couldn't, in fact, change the result. Because if I am standing behind the party or behind the candidate, such event would not bring me away from support of this party. That's, I would say, a standard way of thinking of each voter who is supporting any party in the world, in any country.
All right. Once again, I'd like to thank you for myself and from the panel for joining us here today for this presentation. On your way out, please, you will find the preliminary statement that we have presented here in both English and in Armenian, as well as the press conference from today. And have a wonderful afternoon.